I think the first thing I was ever involved in with Parish Players was I was in a play called The Chalk Garden. I played a part called Mrs. St. Mom, and it was a great play. It was great fun to do. I will say there were a number of problems with it. One was Ed, our founder, was playing the part of the old judge, and he did not bother to learn his lines. And it was following everybody up in every rehearsal when Ed was not learning his lines and not giving them. And so finally, he finally, just before the performance, did get it all together. And there was one performance where I fouled up that really, I've never talked to anybody about this, but it was really very embarrassing. There was a place where someone was supposed to come on stage, and she came into the wings earlier than she usually did in most of the performances. And I kept thinking, why isn't she coming on stage? And I totally lost my place. And I ended up, sort of ad-libbing around, waiting for her to come in, and she didn't come in because she was waiting for me to get to the right place for her to come in. And I ended up skipping about half a page or almost a whole page of dialogue, which then later, because I couldn't refer back to what I had said earlier, to me it made the whole evening destroyed. Other people that were in the audience said they hadn't noticed anything, and I have since learned that that's the case, that there are lots of times things that people on stage are aware of something that happens that isn't right, and the audience doesn't even notice. You just keep going and the audience is oblivious. So that's great, but I've never forgotten that one night, which was just really terrible as far as I was concerned. But most of the time it went well and I enjoyed the show. Then from then on, I didn't do as much on stage. I haven't done an awful lot of being on stage at Parish Players. Mostly I've been backstage. I have directed shows, I have stage managed shows, I have produced shows. I have designed and built sets. I have done a lot of work with props. That's sort of my specialty. I spend a lot of time with props, making props, collecting props, and I manage the props upstairs, and people will contact me if they want to borrow things for other shows. And so that's one of my major involvements with Parish Players, is doing things with props. I've been on a number of different committees. I've been on the board, I've been on the program committee. I've been on the board several times, and I've been on the program committee for several stints. And as I said, I've produced things. One of the things that I produced that I had the most fun with was producing the 10-minute plays a number of years ago. And when we did it, that particular show, we had some wonderful publicity in the Valley News. They had one day where we had a whole page of the entertainment section, with about 10 different pictures of people at different places in the Grange. I remember one particularly was a picture of Neil McGlathery at the bottom of the stairs next to all the brooms. And it was really neat. And there were people up by the costumes, and there was one of me in front of the curtain. And it was very, very good publicity. When the Valley News does things for us, it's great because it makes a big difference, the number of people that come to shows. We had so many people come to that shows that year that we added an extra performance on a Saturday afternoon. And I thought, well, maybe we'll get 20 people, and I guess if we get 20, it's worth doing that and asking the actors to come. We actually ended up selling out that performance, and it was very gratifying to have all the people come to the show. It's wonderful when we have a great audience. It's also interesting to see the difference between audiences. Not only is the shows different every night because the actors interact in different ways some nights, but the audience contributes a lot, and they can be so different from one night to another. I mean, you may get one night that there's an audience that you can hardly hear them breathing, and they don't make any noise at all. And then you have another night where they cheer and clap, and when they do respond enthusiastically, it makes such a difference to the people that are on stage. It just brightens them up, and they add more energy when the audience is full of energy. And that's, that's a fun thing to be here and see. I am a physician, and I never worked full-time, which was nice. I always had time to do other things that I wanted to do. As far as raising children, my children, 3 of my 4 children have been involved with parish players. I have a son who not only acted here, he wrote plays that were done here. I have 2 daughters who both acted in things here. In fact, they were both in one play at the same time. They were both in a Shakespeare show, and one of them playing a romantic lead, and one of them playing an elf. And they had a great time. In fact, Susie, this was back before the Grange was remodeled, and we used to have a stage that was up about 18 inches off the floor, and the proscenium was smaller, and we had steps that came up to the stage. And my daughter, who was sort of the elf, she was a gymnast. And one of the things she did in the show was she did some backflips, and she did one off the stage, and it looked like she'd made a mistake and she'd fallen off the stage, and the audience would go, and she, of course, popped right up and got right into the rest of her routine, because that was built in. She meant to do it. She meant to backflip off the stage. And that was sort of fun to see that. But as I say, my kids were involved as well. In fact, my kids were involved before I was. When we lived in Hanover before we moved to Thetford, and my kids were involved while we still lived in Hanover. I didn't get involved until we moved to Thetford, so I didn't get involved until after 1963 or 1982 when we moved to Thetford. But my kids had been involved before that. Then I was also very involved with parish players with the renovation. I was the chairman of the fundraising committee for the renovation, and we spent a lot of time and talked to a lot of people, and we raised a lot of money. We raised $190,000 to renovate this building. And of course, there was a time that it was under renovation, that we were not using this building, and we had shows in other places. I was involved with one parish players show that was done in the Norwich and La Crosse School, and one that was done at the Seminary Hill School in Lebanon. So I've been involved in parish plays other than here in this building, but it was really wonderful to see this building get revived. And when we got rid of the stage and enlarged the proscenium and raised the ceiling of the auditorium. It was one of the things that was interesting. There were a lot of us that actually worked in some of the renovation. We had a contractor that did most of it, but particularly tearing things apart was a lot of volunteer work. And one of the things that I remember was when we took apart the ceiling here in this room, there was a beam that went all the way across the room, and there were beams that went to that beam, and you'd think that they would have been dovetailed and sat on top of the beam. They did not. They just butted up against it and were fastened with, foot-long nails that were sort of toe-nailed in. And I looked at that construction, and I thought, God, we are so lucky that it didn't fall down when someone was up there walking and working in the costumes or something. It was just unbelievable to see what a terrible construction situation we had. And of course now it's not that way. It's wonderful and sturdy, and it's great. And it's also wonderful to have running water. When I'm cleaning up props afterwards, you have dishes, and we had food and shows before we had running water here, you'd have to bring a couple gallons of hot water to wash the dishes at the end of the show before the next performance. And it's lovely to have it here and be able to use it and not have to carry around water. And of course, it's wonderful not having to fill the wood stove to get heat in the place, which we did. You used to have somebody come before you were having rehearsals or something, someone programmed to come an hour and a half before the rehearsal started to fill the stove. That's nice to not have to do that anymore. So there's been some wonderful changes over the years. Well, I hope we continue to have great shows that we continue to have a lot of people involved. It's wonderful to have new people involved. This is one of the things that the TENS is great for, because people who are not sure they want to really be involved with theater can come and make a relatively small commitment of time and effort and find out that they like it, and then they can come back for something more. But I would love to see the parish players continue to be a community resource. I wish we could get better publicity from the Valley News and other things that, you know, that let us know into the community. The listservs are helpful because people do put things on listservs and people see that we're doing something. It would be lovely to be able to have a season and have something all set up ahead of time, that we know what we're going to do, and that people in the community know that there's going to be something that happens every 4 weeks or every 6 weeks or whatever. But over the years, productions at Parish Players have been largely director-driven. Somebody comes and says, I would like to direct this play, and we find a place to put it. I've tried very hard when I was in the program committee to get people to say, okay, let's sit down and figure out what we want to do and then go out and find a director. And that just doesn't seem to ever work. I wish it did, because I think it would be smoother in our communication with the community if they knew, like Old Church Theater, they have theirs, they set it up, and then they pick the plays, they set it up, then they find a director, and they can say to the community, this is what we're going to do, these 6 shows in the next 6 months. And I think that's useful to the community to know that something is in fact going on, and not just sort of wait, sort of hit or miss when something is happening. So I'd love to see it more formalized, but I don't know if it ever will be.